could come back to their old homes on corner lots, marked each by a pathetic little whitewashed post, a tombstone, over the graves of a myriad of buried human hopes. But it was the Gap where Hale was that died last and hardest, and of the brave spirits there, his was the last and hardest to die. In the autumn, while June was in New York, the signs were sure, but every soul refused to see them. Slowly, however, the vexed question of labor and capital was born again, for slowly each local capitalist went slowly back to his own trade, the blacksmith to his forge, but the carpenter not to his plane, nor the mason to his brick. There was no more building going on. The engineer took up his transit, the preacher politician and was oftener in his pulpit, and the singing teacher started on his round of raucous do mi so la dos through the mountains again. It was curious to see how each man slowly, reluctantly, and perforce sank back again to his old occupation, and the town, with the luxuries of electricity, waterworks, bathtubs, and a street railway, was having a hard fight for the plain necessities of life. The following spring, notes for the second payment on the lots that had been bought at the great land sale fell due, and but very few were paid. As no suits were brought by the company, however, hope did not quite die. June did not come home for the summer, and Hale did not encourage her to come. She visited some of her schoolmates in the North and took a trip West to see her father, who had gone out there again and bought a farm. In the early autumn, Devil Judd came back to the mountains and announced his intention to leave them for good. But that autumn the effects of the dead boom became perceptible in the hills. There were no coal lands bought, logging ceased, the factories were idle once more, moonshine stills flourished. Quarreling started, and at the county seat one court date Devil Judd whipped 3 Falins with his bare fist. In the early spring a Tolliver was shot from ambush, and old Judd was so furious at the outrage that he openly announced that he would stay at home until he had settled the old scores for good. For that, as the summer came on, matters between the Falins and the Tollivers were worse than they had been for years, and everybody knew that with old Judd at the head of his clan, the fight would be fought to the finish. At the Gap, one institution only had suffered in spirit not at all. That was the volunteer police guard. Indeed, as the excitement of the boom had died down, the members of that force, as a vent for their energies, went with more enthusiasm than ever into their work. Local lawlessness had been subdued by this time. The guard had been extending its work into the hills, and it was only a question of time until it must take a part in the Falin-Tolliver troubles. Indeed, that time, Hale believed, was not far away, for election day was at hand, and always on that day the feudalists came to the Gap in a search for trouble. Meanwhile, not long afterward, there was a pitched battle between the factions at the county seat, and several of each would fight no more. Next day a Falin whistled a bullet through Devil Judd's beard from ambush, and it was at such a crisis of all the warring elements in her mountain life that June's school days were coming to a close. Hale had had a frank talk with old Judd, and the old man agreed that the two had best be married at once and live at the Gap until things were quietest in the mountains, though the old man still clung to his resolution to go West for good when he was done with the Falins. At such a time, then, June was coming home. Chapter 20